Excellent. All right, folks, welcome to the inaugural Automation Strategy Community Meetup. I'm Cirillo, and I work on the Customer Experience Strategy team here at HubSpot, really trying to help build better relationships throughout marketing, sales, and service. More important, though, is I have the distinct honor of having Mike Jaramillo here with me today. The man spent almost a decade building marketing automation products at companies you know and love, like ActiveCampaign, Infusionsoft, and our very own HubSpot. Mike, good morning. How is the windy city of Chicago treating you?
Hey, Con, doing really great today. Thanks for having me. Super excited to talk automation strategy and product today with everyone. So thanks, doing good.
Yeah, great. Every day's a gift, especially days where we can talk automation strategy. And before we really get into it, folks, for everyone on the call, I do want to set the stage. There are a few things important that I want to lay the groundwork on. First, let's help each other get better. Every one of you here has experiences and perspectives that others can learn from, right? So this is a safe space. Whether you're a rookie in automation or you're a veteran like our friend Mike, know that this is a community of your peers and that everybody is welcome here and everybody belongs here. And if you have a question, gosh, I'm going to bet somebody else has it too, right? So don't be shy, and please know that this is a forum for us all to share and get better. And now, most important, let's have some fun. Right? You all have taken an hour out of your precious day, whether your day's getting going on the West Coast of the US or it's winding down in EMEA. We very much thank you for being here, and we want to make sure this is fun and educational, fun-educational. Selfishly, Mike, it's not every day that we get to hang out. So I do have a few questions for you to really get things cooking. And then once we're warmed up, I will open the floor to everybody here on the call. Our good friend Jan is running the chat. So if you do have any questions, please do throw them in the chat, and you're going to put them in a doc so Mike and I can get to them in a reasonable time frame as we go through today. And if at any point you'd rather prefer to talk to us live or ask a question live, or you have something to add or something to share, please feel free to use the hand raise function in Zoom or just unmute and ask when there's a good turn to do so. With that out of the way, let's get cooking. Mike, you've spent a lot of time building automation products. They are more than most know why people care about automation, but let's orient today with why do companies care about automation? Why is that something as a business I'd even want to get started with?
Yeah, Con, this is a great place to start, and I'm sure everyone on the call today can probably relate to all of these topics. First and foremost, and this is probably one of the more obvious ones, but I guess over my decade of just being in product across different automation platforms, the biggest thing that I've seen really why people should care about automation, why they do care about it, is really helping the business run more efficiently and effectively, right? And that can equate to a lot of different things, whether it be on the internal side and more of the process side for their team, or the external side and really how it impacts the customer experience. And so, yeah, it's really making things more efficient, streamlined, and again, that equates to a better customer experience, right? We have a lot of different touch points that the automation can hit, and it can also go sour pretty quickly if you do it wrong. And so, I'm sure everyone can probably relate to some war stories or bad experiences with that. So really it's, making sure the customer experience is top of mind there.
Right. So it sounds like great automation not only solves for my go-to-market teams, my marketing folks, my sales folks, my service folks, my RevOps folks, right? But it sounds like really the goal of great automation is an ends to a means of a better customer experience. In terms of what that then does for my business strategy, what does that unlock? If I can solve for my agents, I can solve for my customers, what does that really do for me over the long term?
Yeah, so it really sets the business up for success. I would say I see far too many companies just jumping right into building mode, if with automation, which rightfully so is exciting.
It's fun.
It's fun. We geek out over, getting our hands dirty and just building cool things, right? But I think hitting the brakes, slowing down a little bit, and really thinking through what the strategy is, what your business goals are, and really tying that to what you're building, I think is sort of the key to success, right? And that's again where I see a lot of companies, either backtrack, they realize that they didn't set up the proper strategy up front with, marrying that with their building. building mode, and really they're backpedaling to sort of correct that or build, better automation around those strategies. And so really
Well,
that's what it equates to. Yep.
Yeah. When you talk strategy, I think one of the things that we're not talking enough about, and something I know is very near and dear to your heart, is that automation actually, from a strategic side, looks a lot different than it did a couple of years ago. Tell us about that. How has automation really evolved?
Yeah, I'm sure everyone also can relate to this. Automation, even probably 2 or 3 years ago, was, I would say, very one-dimensional, right? Or at least that was the perception. And what I mean by that, we used to think that maybe marketing automation was really the only thing that was super important, right? Whether that be creating an email drip series, a nurture campaign, that sort of thing. And it's really evolved into being multidimensional, and again, the full customer experience, and hitting at all those touch points, whether it be from a sales perspective, from an operations perspective, and really tying all of that together is sort of where we're at today in the landscape. And I don't see that going anywhere. It's going to keep evolving. It's going to keep getting more tight knit, between those different systems and across the business. So really that's where things are at today. And again, it's really evolved into a multi-dimensional sort of perspective.
Right. You have your marketing automation, your sales automation, your services automation. I now even hear the phrase CXA, customer experience automation, right? So it sounds like automation and scale, it's different than it was, right? It is more parts of your company and it can do more for you. But none of that really matters though if the strategy is not in the right place. And from
Sorry, I'm not sure if Con, I think maybe there's a connection issue. Okay, thanks. Stand by, everyone. Sorry about that. Okay, bear with us, everyone. Thanks. I think Con is jumping back on here. I'm going to keep sort of the discussion going, really just on my own, and I'm happy to kind of anyone can jump in here just while we're waiting for Con. Really talking about again, strategy being like the top thing that really teams can incorporate. I've seen a lot of teams do playbooks. I don't know if anyone else does just super clear documentation for strategy. That's something that we're pretty big at here at HubSpot internally, and that I've seen teams really. Hey, Con, I think you're back.
I am back. It's really tricky to host a webinar when the power company knocks out the internet cable on the street, which makes it a little tricky. So, in the spirit of being adaptable and flexible, we're on the hotspot. So I appreciate everyone's AV patience with us. I promise I wasn't ditching you, but again, a little tough to talk to our good friend Mike here when the internet doesn't work anymore.
I broke into monologue mode, so you're totally good. I was talking strategy and playbooks, so.
Well, you talk about the playbooks, right? And again, folks, I do appreciate your patience with that little hiccup on there. In terms, Mike, you're talking about playbooks, right? And forgive me if this is something you've covered, but it sounds like from a strategy side, you do need to think about being deliberate, and you have to be mindful of what you're trying to build and why. So did you already talk about mapping out your strategy from a flow charting side, or is that something I can still?
No, yeah, let's get into that. I think that's a good topic to pick up on. So, we talked about the different touch points and angles that you should take automation from, whether it be from an ops perspective, marketing, sales, growth perspective. really having a written plan, but also drawing it out is something I see a lot of customers doing before they jump into the software, right? Really, whether that be on a whiteboard, on pen and paper. I know it's a little more challenging now that we've been remote, probably for the past year or so. But really, drawing that out might sound, a little obvious, or a little kindergartenish, but really, it's mirroring that to what you build in workflows, or in other automation platforms. I think is key. I use Lucid charts a ton. I don't know if anyone else is a fan of Lucid.
Love Lucid chart.
That's something that I always try to leverage when I'm thinking through strategy, or just mapping something out, in terms of a workflow. So yeah, that's another great thing, just being hands-on. I'd love to hear, when we open it up to Q&A, any other like creative approaches that anyone else has tried outside of that. So.
Yeah. And this is where I come from, again, kind of a mix of the marketing and the product background, customer journey maps, right? And actually saying, okay, like, where are folks going today? Where do we want them to go? What does it feel like when they get there, right? I think those are all frameworks and tools that become really helpful when you want to map out, again, the strategy of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
What else is it? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to jump in, Con, on like one other thing that I'm seeing a lot of other platforms, and something we are starting to get into here at HubSpot with automation, is really helping the user define that strategy through the onboarding process. So you're going to start to see a lot more really asking the user sort of what goals or objectives they're trying to achieve. Goals is something we're looking at improving, on the roadmap down the road within workflows, and really tying what that strategy is up front when the user first enters automation. It is really something that we're honing in on. I've seen a lot of other platforms do that sort of hand-holding approach and guided approach. And I think it's necessary really to build the right things up front. So.
Right. And that's also where to steal another product-y concept, right? Jobs to be done. What are we actually trying to get someone to do? We're not just sending them an email so we can say we sent an email, right? We want to send an email so they can go book a meeting with the sales team or learn about new tools. So I agree. If you don't have that piece up front, right, it's a house of cards at that point. Yep. So I absolutely agree. One thing that when we were prepping for this, that you mentioned that I got really excited about, is this concept of being human-centric and customer-centric. I think if anybody's playing tech buzzword bingo, you can check off your customer-centric box. I promise we'll do a bunch of AI acronyms in a minute. But from a human-centric, customer-centric standpoint, where are folks going wrong from an automation strategy side today?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this, Con, because this is probably the number 2 thing that I see a lot of companies and users not include in their automation, right? And it's probably the second most important thing. And it's really including that human touch throughout your automation, throughout your messaging, and really not sounding robotic, not letting the automation take over, right? And it's really about including personalization, right? We've heard that term quite a bit over the years, and it's not going anywhere, right? Personalization is here to stay. It's getting just more intelligent, more sophisticated. And it's really harmonizing that human touch with ML, with AI elements, things like that. And we're going to continue seeing that in our platform, in other platforms, and really that again equates to the great customer experience that we want. So.
Right. And I mean, I spent a long time building chatbots, which by nature are robots, but we always would joke, you can build robots that aren't robotic, and that's what you should be shooting for. And I'm going to go on a riff on a couple adages here, but talk about B2B and B2C, right? People might go, oh, well, I'm B2C, so my automation must feel very rigid and, where's a tie? And I don't think that's, true at all anymore, right? The only difference between B2B and B2C is that somebody is buying for a company and somebody's buying for themselves. And so it is all the principles we care about of being heard and seen and valued, and remembering to make folks feel really good in that experience. Again, those principles haven't gone anywhere. And again, I agree with you, Mike, are only going to get more important now that, and I'm looking at the folks on the call, I'm going to close my eyes. I'd venture to guess you all have competitors that sell a pretty similar thing to what you sell, right? So if you can't just win on the product alone anymore, and you have to really now couple that with a great customer experience, the great Maya Angelou, right? It's not, they won't remember what you said. They'll remember how you made them feel. And I think that from an automation standpoint is so true. If you don't have empathy and the problems that your customers are facing at the core of everything you're doing, and you're designing it in that way, it's only going to get so far. And to your point, bad automation, we know it when we feel it, and we know it when we see it, and we know how quickly that turns us off. So it is one of those. I agree. If you're not human centric, it's not going to go very far.
Yeah, not sending messages at the right time or not at all is a huge miss that we see. Or you said it right now, like getting personalization incorrectly, right? That's even worse than not doing
Hi, first
it at all.
name. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's key. Again, we're only going to see that evolve more. And again, there's no substitution for emotional intelligence, and including that in your automation, I think will keep you authentic and keep your brand and company authentic with the user.
Right.
So.
Right. So it sounds like at this point, the two big pillars you're saying are you need like a really thorough plan. You need to know what you're doing and why, and you need to keep kind of humans at the center of it. That doesn't sound like it's enough though. What's kind of the third pillar that companies need to really make automation great?
Yeah. So the third sort of pillar strategy that, again, that I think is most important also with these other two and sort of ties them together is just visibility and knowing how well your automation performs, right? That's always a challenge, especially since there's so many touch points working together, and having a clear visibility into the bigger picture of what's performing, what's not performing, I think is key. And really how can we sort of remedy that challenge, right? I think, leaning on reporting elements in HubSpot and other tools, I think is key. Really zooming in on what those reports are telling you, what the data is telling you. I mean, we're all automation experts, and I think treat automation almost as an experiment. Also, I see a lot of companies just really leveraging testing and experimentation and A/Bing, different things. And I think that's a great mindset to have, especially when you're trying to really perfect and hone in on like making the system complete and functioning. So that's that's a great topic to sort of end with.
I mean, it does sound like the one thing that people say a lot is, "Oh, automation is a set and forget thing." It doesn't sound like you see it that way.
No, yeah, set and forget. I've always been a fan of that saying, other than I will say the forget part. I would say
you like the set part. You like that you should build it.
Exactly. Yeah, like I'm all for automating things, but you need to go back to what you've built and really measure it, make sure it's performing adequately. And again, I think automation can, I don't want to say you can't perfect it, but I think you can really narrow it down to make it work well for your business. And again, we'll talk about, and I'd love to hear thoughts from the audience when we get into Q&A of what's working, what's not working from a performance or optimization perspective.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great transition to, I would love to hear again. We got a lot of folks in the call, some that are using HubSpot, some that have used it for years, some that have never heard of HubSpot, and in which case, hi, nice to meet you. Right. So I think we got a lot of different perspectives on this call. And again, everybody's got a story to share. And so I think this would be a good point. We'd love to open it up to the group. I think the first question that's on my mind, at least, is what's an automation strategy that you're really thinking about doubling down on as we look into Q2 and beyond? Would love, again, if you'd like to put it in the chat, we can speak to it there, or if you'd prefer to unmute and kind of share it live, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll open it up to the floor now. Advertising with workflow. Zach, would you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Really glad that HubSpot, whoever determined that this was a valuable topic. So we have a scoring mechanism that auto progresses our contacts through lifecycle stages. And we're looking to augment that with LinkedIn advertising. So our score is entirely based on how a contact interacts with our marketing collateral. Mm-hmm. And I've really tested the HubSpot support staff, and there's sort of barriers or limitations to what they may know and understand when it gets a little bit more complex. But being able to pull data from LinkedIn advertising back into HubSpot to make sure that those automations are both correct in their setup as well as sort of in our intended use. And I guess my question goes into a little bit more of how to create a little bit more nuanced campaigns within HubSpot, and tying audiences to those so that we can advertise to lists and then have that be our automation process, is basically with list management.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I think from a product side, you might be a little closer to the mechanics of it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Zachary, I'm wondering, this is a great like use case that we've seen not only with LinkedIn, but I mean, Facebook ads has also come up in the same use case, but I don't know if it's possible right now. I'd love to probably connect you with my colleague, Katie Koenig, who's another senior PM here at HubSpot over our ads team. I don't think you can do this for what you're describing in lead scoring today. You can set up like attribution and lead scoring, like basic lead scoring, but I don't know if it sounds like what you're needing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to tie that back to like a lead from LinkedIn.
It is, we have sort of jerry-rigged it to be highly functional for our use case. So what we have a series of contacts within HubSpot, and then when we advertise to our HubSpot's database, um, sort of the workflows around how those specific ads get delivered, and then just making sure that the data flow back into it is uh, correct. I'd like it's true, accurate data.
So is the challenge, I guess, trying to automate that? Is that, yeah, I guess what specific, it sounds like you guys are getting the data, but is it the mechanics of it, you're just trying to automate that entire process?
We haven't turned anything on yet.
Okay.
Uh, in a fairly well-established company in a fairly mature industry, as I'm sure a lot of people on this call can understand, it's if you're the one sort of setting things up, you want to make sure that everything is as correct as possible, if not better.
Sure.
And so I've just noticed what seems like a lot of literature, but within HubSpot around using advertising in workflows for automation. But it, when I get into workflows and looking at the properties that can be set, um, I'm just, there seems to be a disconnect within the realm of possibilities, but then the actualization of how that data can be used. Because we basically want to look at if there's a click and looking at properties that are generated on a click from an ad, and then using that to correspond with an increase in our score.
Got it. Yeah. So you are able to set up scoring. I don't, correct me if you've already done this, but you can set up a scoring system based on ad interaction. I can link, I'm happy to like connect offline too and just make sure your use case is solved by this or not. It may be very basic for what you guys are needing. So I'd love to like get some feedback also if we could beef it up. But I'll drop this link in the chat here, but you can set up like manual lead scoring, and there's an ad interactions. There's another article that I'll look for and connect with you, Zachary, but how to actually set up the interaction. You can do that. I'll have to like confirm how robust it is for what you guys are needing. But it sounds like that might suffice potentially.
Yeah, I've I'm pretty well versed in all the literature that you have on it, and
Yeah.
I think the ultimate question, to sort of get, I would be more than happy to give feedback and figure out sort of a path forward. But the it seems like for some of the properties, I will just have to do if click that, like if click ID is known versus is not known, because I won't necessarily know the click ID, but I need to know that if there is a click ID that exists, then trigger a workflow. So I don't know if you can
Oh,
speak
got
to
it.
that at all.
So it's like a specific ID you're looking for.
It's not a specific ID, but when I'm triggering the workflow, I need to know that a click has occurred. And so it's a little bit, and maybe I'm looking for the wrong element there, but it's like if you do a filter where lifecycle stage is blank, then you know that it hasn't been set. And so
Sorry, go ahead, Zach.
in the same vein, it's just how to know when a click has existed, because there is no has clicked. It's more of a does a click ID exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think Mike and I think maybe we can connect you with some of the other PMs who might be able to help answer this. I think I get from a strategic side, definitely get what you're looking to do. In fairness of this is obviously complex, you know that better than I do. How about we follow up with you separately and see how we can map this out and get you point in the right direction. I think we can help, with the right whiteboard in front of me.
Yeah, and it'd be good to
Yeah, no,
hear the use case a little bit more, Zachary. And if there's something we're not meeting, we can talk through that.
Sure. Yeah, I know that I was probably a little bit more nuanced than most others, but yeah, thanks again. That's all that I have.
Awesome. Thank you, Zachary. I see a question here. I'm jumping around a bit. I promise Jan's doing a great job feeding these in, and we will get to as many as we can. Siddhartha, and I hope I got that right. Is there an automation strategy or playbook to keep the contacts database clean and healthy? I think one thing that we do from a HubSpot side, from our emails, we have a concept called SSLE, so send since last engagement. And what we're kind of thinking about is, okay, if there are folks who maybe go on vacation for a week and don't open a few of our emails, that's fine. Like, we'll send some more when they get back, and hopefully they engage with us. And what we notice, or what we believe, is that over time, if you don't engage, so in our case, if you don't engage with 9 marketing emails in a row, we actually suppress you from future sends until you interact with something and kind of show us a sign of life. Because what we don't want to do is bug you if you're not interested, or HubSpot's, like you're doing something else now. Our perspective is we want to make sure we're always reaching the right people in the right place at the right time. And so what you could do to make sure the database is clean and healthy, I think, is have automation that actually suppresses the folks that you don't want to be talking to, right? You would rather send an email to 100 people that are really excited to hear from you than 1,000 that don't know who your name is, right? So I think that's from an automation strategy side. One thing that we've done is bake in this send since last engagement and some of these suppression kind of perspectives into our email marketing. And that is helping us make sure that we are kind of always pruning the database and making sure that we're reaching the right people with the right message. I think too, from a strategy side, I mean, there's certainly win back campaigns you could set up, or automation you could set up to try to get back in touch with folks, like a win back campaign. If maybe it's been a month or two since you've heard from somebody, this is where I think the one-off piece and the automation piece kind of work really well. Maybe you send a one-off email to those folks that are like, hey, haven't heard from you in a bit. Here's some content you might find interesting. Here's something of value to you. And then at that point, again, that's where if they start engaging again, maybe that's a healthy sign to start putting them back in your other automation programs. Or again, if they continue to not engage over time, maybe you end up suppressing them. Again, it's better to market to a few people who really are excited to hear than a more lukewarm audience would be the way I think about it. I got a question here. This is actually from LinkedIn. Mike, I think this is a good one for you. How do you think about a market, like when you think about an automation platform, or you're a company trying to pick a new platform to build automation on? What comes to mind as like criteria that you might care about when considering a decision like that?
Yeah, so I always like it really depends, I think, on the type of user that you are, and I'll split this into sort of two different categories that I see. It's usually category one is someone that is very well versed in automation. They've potentially used a different platform before, and they're migrating over to HubSpot. So that's category one. Category two is someone that knows nothing about automation, is not well versed at all. You know, they're sort of a starter at automation, if you will. So I think it depends on both those paths of what type of user and what business you are. Let's assume that you are well versed in a platform. I usually like to see how easy it is to onboard and get started with that new platform. I know that's a huge challenge for a lot of people, whether they're experienced or not. You know, moving from one system to another can be, you know, difficult. Um, you know, whether that be bringing on, you know, importing, so to speak, my automations from the other platform. List hygiene is another great example of like just getting your list set up. And I think HubSpot does it really well. I think there's some areas obviously we can improve on, like the getting started side, which we are working on right now. And so yeah, so it's getting started, how easy it is to sort of onboard with a platform. That's sort of criteria one for that use case. Second thing is just really how robust and how wide and what the breadth of the automation is. I've seen some platforms that are very simple and maybe meet the needs for a lot of users, but I also see some platforms that they don't extend to other areas like ops, like sales. And so I always look for how wide and how depth the automation and the builder really can go, right? What are the capabilities of actions, things like that. And I really use a lot of judgment, I would say, on that piece, because I think it really tells sort of like the breadth of the use cases that it could solve for. Yeah.
I build on that. Like, I think another thing too is extensibility. So you talk about breadth and depth, which is a concept that I'm a huge proponent of. When you think about an automation platform, right? What can be done out of the box with like a WYSIWYG, drag and drop, and workflows in HubSpot, I think is a good example. There's a ton you can do just by clicking a button and setting up an if-then branch, right? Like that works for a lot of use cases. Where I think the next chapter of automation for marketing, sales, service, whatever is really going is the extensibility. What can I build on top? I know my use cases better than you do, right? You being a generic platform. So enable me as a builder to go bring that to life. And I think if you look at platforms like Segment and Twilio kind of bundled together, you know, they do a good job. ActiveCampaign, another one, making sure that you can kind of tweak and tailor and build the bespoke things that, again, are right for your company. Because no matter how much empathy we have, you know, there's always going to be a use case we may not know. And I think that's a good HubSpot now with recently an operations hub with custom code actions and workflows. I do think we made a nice step in this direction. And so if you're trying to say, okay, I have all these other tools, I could connect them with a Zapier, I could connect them with webhooks, right? Being able to now stitch and orchestrate more of your automation across an experience. I think platforms who see that and believe in that and are building in that direction, I think become really powerful and will work in the long term. To Mike, to your point, right? If a platform solves for today's need, but gee, I plan on doubling my company in 2 years, my needs might look a little different in 2 years. I think there's something to be said for a platform, yes, that you can see value in today and also can grow into other use cases in the future. Not that you need to be whipping out, you know, code on day one, but you want to know that ability is there as you go, hey, what if we XYZ, right? Knowing that an automation platform can kind of support that. I do think that at least gives me peace of mind knowing that, okay, I'm going to make a decision today. And I know that in a couple of years, we still have ability to kind of carve and shape this how we need to. And I think that extensibility becomes important.
Yeah, we live in a very platform world now, right? Where integrations are expected, you know, everywhere. And I think that's okay that we don't solve every need. We don't want to be every platform out there. But we want to open that up and really welcome and allow those other integrations to, you know, really work with HubSpot's automation. And so, yeah, I think extensibility is like key there. You know, I always look at like some of the marketplace and like integration offerings for a lot of these platforms and really see what their capabilities are, what they offer. So yeah, that's probably, I would say those two things, onboarding and really extensibility, breadth, I think are my two criterias there.
I agree with that. We got a question from Renee here about, do you have recommendations on best of breed automations? Renee, do you mean that more from like a platform perspective or like use cases? Like what's the best, email nurturing experience? Would love to know more about what you're looking for. All right, Renee, if you want to throw that question in the chat or something, we're happy to, oh, there we go. Exactly. More ways to test playbooks and figure out what works. Mike, from an automations or a workflows perspective, how do you think about goals and branches and success? How do you think about a better approach to being data-driven?
Yeah, Renee, so this is actually, you hit on something like from a testing perspective, and hopefully this is where the root of your question's coming from. This is something actually that we are leaning into more in automation that we want to improve on is really testing out goals, really defining, again, sort of that third pillar I mentioned about visibility, making sure that you're aware and that your workflow is performing adequately. This is something we're working on this year and going into next year as well. Whether that be, we're looking at offering more testing capabilities. If you're familiar with the performance tab within workflows, that's something we're looking at improving and really giving better insights into what's working, what's not working, and tying those to some of the principles that are laid out in some of the playbooks. I'd love to chat also, Renee, with you or anyone else on the call about feedback on that. But yeah, that we are working on that. I will say it's probably pretty limited in some aspects today.
Renee, to your follow-up question on how do you know what to score things? They're all guesses. I think that's a great question, and I appreciate you asking that because I think that's one of those. I know for a long time I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Is this the right way to do it? I think to your point, it is kind of a guess. I mean, it should be educated in the sense that again, your business, your use case. If somebody visits the homepage versus the pricing page, right? Well, that's going to signal different stuff to you. If they download an ebook versus, I don't know, book a meeting with your sales team, you're like, I think it's you should bucket in your head what at least is like low intent, medium intent, high intent, what actions are more valuable, again, given the context of your company. And then scoring those numerically, I think I would at least sort them by low, medium, high to start. And then you can assign some numerical range. Maybe that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? You can kind of find what those ranges are. Knowing that, again, it is a art and a science at the end of the day, where I'd say the right way to approach, there's a right way to approach it, right? Of I think bucketing those things. And at the same time, I don't know that there's necessarily like an absolute correct right and wrong way to necessarily assign those scores. Again, I think that's where your company and the actions folks take. And I think you are the best one to manifest the destiny of what do we care about more. So agreed, yeah. It's not a science, and that's okay.
Yeah, Con, I would add to that, like, it's really, I would say, an art of like knowing your journey and knowing the different touch points in your business, right? And that goes back to what we said about like mapping out the strategy, mapping it out in a lucid chart of literally from, before they become a customer to when you're nurturing them, and they're a loyal, lifelong customer. What are all those touch points in between that you could maybe score or maybe shouldn't score, right? To your point, Con, maybe there's something you don't need to score that might be unnecessary. So I think it's really mapping it out and really calculating what makes sense and what doesn't.
I see a question here from, again, this was I cheated a little bit and teased this on LinkedIn. I got a question. Outside of leads passed to sales, how are you seeing marketers show the ROI on automation? I would say from what success looks like, right? As Mike mentioned earlier, it's not just marketing automation, like leads to sales, like that's one part of automation. That can be one use case. But maybe deflecting customer support tickets or internal enablement, right? I think there's a lot of ways that you can calculate ROI. And so what I would say is, again, start with the first principles of like what the problem you want to solve is. What would the dream world look like? There's this concept we talk about as, as is versus could be, right? So like, what do you have today and what's working and what are you trying to accomplish? And then what would that dream future state look like? And that may help say, okay, if the use case is X and we want to, for example, qualify or triage support tickets to our customer service reps, like you will then kind of know what is the number or what's the metric that's going to show you if you're doing that the right way. And again, that's whether you're using workflows or you're using HubSpot at all, right? I think agnostic of the platform you pick, knowing that you have the right metric picked for the right reason from that strategy, and you're actually, again, being data-driven with how you test to validate that. Those are the principles that I think apply really, Mike, I'd say agnostic of any channel, use case, platform, you name it. I feel like those things matter more. Mike, anything you'd add on that? You feel good on that one?
No, yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I'd be curious what others are doing, or, if others are running into any challenges under that arena right now. Yeah, I think it's really, again, it goes back to that first pillar that we talked about of really like knowing what your strategy is before just jumping into building mode.
I got a question, Mike. What is one thing you've changed your mind on recently about automation and why? That's a good one.
That is a great question. I don't know if it's I guess I undervalued. I always knew personalization was key, but I think in the last like year or two, especially in the world we've been living in, it's even more important. But really, yeah, like data, having clean data, having like great segmentation, having a clean, accurate list, is the only way you're really gonna be able to master and like be great at personalization, in my opinion. So yeah, it's really like honing into that, collecting data when you can, collecting insights and behaviors when you can through automation. That's probably one. I also, this is one I if we look back to like predictions, I always like looking at like what did like experts predict 2 or 3 years ago on automation? What was the next best thing? Push notifications. This is one I always like talking about. Used to be like a big thing that people thought would blow up, and like we get into omni-channel and things like that. And I don't know how the audience feels, but I think they're annoying. I don't think they're effective. I think they're effective in some use cases, but like that's one that I just like, I've been turned off on, I guess, so to speak, in the last few years. But yeah, those are like two things that come to mind, Con.
Yeah, you mean I can't just start every email with in these unprecedented times? Are times ever precedented again? I don't know if they're allowed to be precedented. I'd say the thing I'd add.
One more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Con. Didn't mean to interrupt.
I'd say the thing I'd add about what I've changed my mind on is actually like omni-channel. And it's funny you mentioned that. Omni-channel being there's so many different places and ways you can reach people. One thing from an automation standpoint that I've really kind of like saw the matrix on recently was how to create automation that like respects and looks at what everyone's doing. So I mentioned that if you don't open a handful of HubSpot emails in a row, we're going to suppress you from emails, or we might say, hey, you're dormant, you're not that interested anymore. Right. One thing that I've been pushing the team on recently is, well, why don't we stitch other activities into it? If someone's like coming to the website or chatting with the sales team through like a chat bot or the live chat, if they're right doing anything of value, maybe we actually think about marketing to them differently. Right. So maybe it's not that we don't send you anything anymore, but we send you different stuff. And so I think our automation programs, frankly, like we only were really looking at email because, again, email has been the main vein. It's been that workhorse channel. It's been great for so long and still is. What I'm now seeing the value in is actually like working and weaving in other channels and other activities into the automation strategy. So that way, when you're going to send the right message to somebody, you know that you're factoring in all the other things that they've done. And that was a perspective that I think, frankly, while well-intentioned, our own marketing team was really siloed for a long time because like we weren't thinking of it that way. We're like, oh, well, if you don't do email stuff, we don't send you email stuff. And it's like, yeah, what about all the other channels what if somebody calls? You know what I mean? I think we're now seeing the power of stitching that story together and having that 360-degree view of the customer, which, we admittedly didn't have before.
Yeah, Irene posted a great question in the chat that I want to address. So she said, is it possible to track what contacts access our knowledge base created through HubSpot and add automations based on the feedback they leave? So one of the things on our roadmap this year for automation, we are trying to extend workflows and automation in general through different core apps throughout HubSpot. So that's something that we've for years have very centralized automation in workflows. And we're trying to extend that into other areas like ads, like knowledge base, things like that. So I'd love to, Irene, I actually would love to chat with you offline if you're open to that, about that use case. I think that's a very, I think it's an interesting use case and something probably that a lot of people would get value from. But yeah, I'd love to chat. Maybe if you could send me a DM of your email. But yeah, I just wanted to call that out, that is something we are looking at doing this year, and even beyond that is bringing automation to other parts of HubSpot. So you don't have to go back and forth into workflows, and you can just automate things within the app that you're in. So.
Love that. Mike, you're gonna have some good follow-up conversations. I think that's always fun to make plans on these things, right? That's the whole point.
And Irene, I don't think you can do that today. So I do want to talk about that, but yeah, it is not possible today, from what I understand.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question here about how is the mix of go-to-market automation strategies across all those words off your buzzer bingo. How's the mix of go-to-market automation strategies changed for HubSpot as a result of the pandemic? This came to me on Twitter. In terms of the mix of things that we have been doing as HubSpot, right? I think the biggest channel that got a lot of juice, you talk about COVID being a great accelerant and all the things that were kind of happening over the next handful of years, really just getting like squished into last year. Again, was it painful? Absolutely. Right. And I think one of the things that we saw is the rise of chat and actually conversational marketing. Like, it was really important. We saw the trajectory of it. Again, that's a channel near and dear to my heart. And we had been seeing that grow. And then right around when the pandemic hit, we just saw that skyrocket, and it really hasn't regressed. You talk about now that like countries are starting to open up again and people are going outside again. It was one of those things like, is it going to change? Are people not going to chat anymore? And what I believe is that it's one of those changes that it's structural. Like we're going to keep chatting because that's a place people go, hey, I'm working from home with my roommates and we're sharing the desk. Right. I don't really feel like getting on the phone. I'm too emotionally drained. Right. We're just seeing a lot of people now go to chat and go to conversational marketing as like the main channel that they want to have a conversation on. And I think that's a really exciting thing. Again, we want to have faster, meet people where they are, experiences overall. And what we're seeing is conversational marketing and conversational support really being two engines that are really, really growing. I think from a support side, we saw chat become the most popular way that folks want to talk to the HubSpot support team. It eclipsed, right, web tickets and calls, the things that, again, had been juggernauts of the last decade. Chat has now become the main vein. And what that offers as an automation opportunity is how do we use chatbots for things that automation's good at, and humans for things that humans are great at, which is many things. And how do we balance those together to make one of those 1 + 1 = 3 experiences? And so we've seen a lot of support saying, how can we use a chatbot to answer maybe 5% of questions, right? And then for all those other folks, get them to the humans that can maybe take them the rest of the way. Or can we use a chatbot to structure and triage, hey, do you have a problem with X part of the product? What are you seeing? Can you describe it for me? Right? Just standardizing stuff with automation and collecting that info, again, enables humans to be faster. And that's, again, one of those solves for prospects and customers, solves for your agents as well. And so that's been one of those big automation strategy pieces that I'm pleasantly surprised and really excited by, what has happened to date and kind of what I see being the next few years of the idea of faster responses in the places where people want them. It's something the narrative has talked about that for a long time. You've heard, chat's the next big thing, bots the next big thing. I think last year and the past year is really when we've seen that narrative and the data kind of grow to be at the same place of, look, this is a big thing. And so from our own automation side of HubSpot, you're definitely seeing us continue to lean into that and say, how do we make it easier for you to reach us through chat? So that's been something that I've been pleasantly surprised to see over the last, year or so. All right, I'm mindful we have about 8 minutes left. I know we've gotten to a lot of the questions, and what I'd say is if you had a question that Mike and I have not had a chance to get to, please do follow up with us, chase us down on LinkedIn or email us, and we are definitely happy to post the answers because we really want to make sure that we are getting you all the knowledge that we can. Mike, I do want to end with a fun little segment called predictions. And this is something where marketing and tech, we love to think we know what we're talking about. And I think sometimes we get it really right. And other times we're Google Glass and we get it totally wrong. And so what I'd love to spend a couple minutes with you on is just talking about, from an automation standpoint, really ground this in automation. What would be one of the trends that people were talking about 3 years ago, and how right did they end up being?
Yeah, I love this question, Con. So yeah, 3 years ago, again, omni-channel, multi-channel, you just touched on chatbots, was predicted, really extending marketing automation outside of email. That was like one big prediction is we need to hit at these, these different channels. Email is not going away anywhere though, right? Like as evidence as the last year during the pandemic. So I think I had heard a lot of predictions 3 years ago that email was going to drop and, these other channels would take over. That's definitely
only text, B2B, we're only texting now.
So
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that was one prediction. Content and video through automation, that was another one that I think did come true. Like video is not going away anywhere. It's definitely evolved. 2 or 3 years ago, you had people were, companies were on like the live kick of doing like Facebook Live, Instagram Live. I think it's sort of evolved into like more condensed, shorter videos, TikTok, stories, Instagram Watch, that sort of thing. So content really isn't going anywhere. Video content, to be more specific, and building that throughout automation, I think is going to be key, sort of as we go forward. And really, did I stop a video? Did I pause it at a certain point? And then hitting me with, personalization and follow up depending on my behaviors with the video content. And then iPaaS, that's the last thing. Platform as a service has exploded. That's not going away anywhere. In fact, we're seeing where automation platforms are being more user and code friendly, where you have these no code automation builders come to life. And again, we're just going to see that evolve even more and easier to use, which is a goal here at HubSpot. So.
Right. And the nice thing about no and low code is that it kind of, in a way, democratizes access to building cool stuff, right? Your ability to build cool stuff is no longer limited by how many developers do you have lying around. Again, I've been in a company where there have been 0 developers lying around. So I think the rise of no and low code is welcome. Platforms like Zapier, right, make it now easier to configure the stuff that you want to and get where you want to be. So I agree with that. Mike, I will say from a chatbot side, again, this was near and dear to my heart for a long time and still is. Yeah, I agree. The narrative, right, was way out of control, right? Like bots were everything. Your parents are now bots. Like it was out of hand. And I think we've now seen that bots are still really important, and messaging is really important. WhatsApp's really important if you do any business outside the US, right?
Yep.
And I think we're now just seeing a little bit more of a mature perspective on, okay, it's not everything, but it's really important for a couple things. And I think that is, I agree, that was something that the narrative, I would say, totally was off. But where we've gotten to now, I think, is in a really healthy place. And Mike, looking forward, we do love to predict automation. What do you see 3 years from now? What are some of the trends that you're really interested in watching?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned one of them, the no code builder. I think that's just going to get easier to use. Tying back to personalization, again, we're only going to see that more intelligently through AI, through ML, and really transforming the way we do marketing automation and just automation in general. It's going to give us greater insights. We're going to have more, targeting based behaviors, that sort of thing. And then the last thing that's really been obviously on the rise for the last few years that isn't going away anywhere is just like data privacy in general. That was something I wouldn't say I devalued in any way, but something that I've grown an appreciation and respect for over the years, and keeping that top of mind in my automation, that's just going to get harder, really, to be frank, for us as, automation folks. And I think we just need to keep that in mind.
Right. We got to get more creative is what you're saying. And
exactly.
Hey, I think we know a thing or two about that. And for folks keeping score, the AI ML, I think you can officially check off bingo. So congrats to everybody. No, I agree. From an AI side, I think it's one of those things where, again, you hear a ton about it. I've heard a ton about it for a long time. I think it's like bots in the sense that AI is not coming for your job tomorrow. AI is not an ends to a means of, you no longer have humans at your company, right? I don't believe that to be the case at all. So it is one of those things where I think it'll be really important for some use cases. Scoring, I think that's certainly something where people mentioned earlier today. right? How important scoring is. I think that's a good use case for AI and ML. But it's not one of those, you click a button and your company just automates everything and your emails are written. I think there's still very much a need when you're implementing AI to be, again, strategic, measuring the right things, trying to do the right things, and keeping that customer experience really top of mind, I think is, the most important things that you're going to need to make sure you're watching. Folks, I will say, Mike, thank you so much for the time today. An entire hour with you, hard to come by. So really do appreciate you making this time to talk with the HubSpot community and myself. Selfishly, I learned a lot. Everybody in the call, again, I want to say thank you very much for the time. An hour out of your day, that means a lot to us, and we really appreciate you being here. Mike and I have both put our LinkedIns in here. Anything we can answer, anything we didn't get to, anything on your mind, please feel free to connect with us and shoot us a message. Mike also put his email, and feel free to get in touch with him as well. So again, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. And I hope you learned something about automation strategy. I'm Cirillo. Thank you very much.